This morning, to celebrate Mother's Day, I thought we should take a look back at the couple of the mothers of our faith tradition. We hear a lot about the famous Unitarian Universalist men of history: Thomas Jefferson, James Adams, Horace Mann, E. Cummings, P.T. Barnum, Ralph Waldo Emerson, Thomas Starr King. We don't talk as much about the women of our history: Abigail Adams, Dorothea Dix, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Florence Nightingale, Clara Barton, Emily Dickinson, Beatrix Potter, Sylvia Plath. Yes, all of those were Unitarians or Universalists, and that is a very abbreviated list. This morning, I want to talk about a couple of historical women who aren't quite as famous as those, but two women who are mothers of our tradition: Maria Cook and Olympia Brown. Maria Cook was the first Universalist woman preacher in America. She was born in 1779. The Revolutionary War was in progress at the time of her birth. When she was 8 years old, the Constitution was ratified. Even in the midst of all the talk of religious freedom and human rights, Universalism was a wild, heretical idea. Thank you, Marley, for closing the door. And women preaching was an absolutely unimaginable spectacle. Maria Cook fought incredibly hard to follow her call into ministry. Her ministry began early in 1811 in Bradford County, Pennsylvania, in her home. She invited people to come and discuss and to pray together very casually. Later that same year, she attended the conference, her statewide conference of Universalists, and they had heard of this woman, that she might be a good preacher, so they asked her to talk to them. Then and there, her skills impressed them so much that they presented her with a letter of fellowship. So in clergy geek talk, that means that she was informally ordained to be an itinerant Universalist preacher. She was the first woman to be charged with spreading the hopeful message of universal salvation. For a year, she toured pulpits through central New York, and while she was doing that, she gathered crowds that were larger than other evangelists. Some people who weren't even Universalists went to see this spectacle of a female preacher. And it's said that she managed to convert a lot of those people, not just to her female preaching ability, but also to accept the really controversial belief in Universalism. For a short time, she was the highest paid itinerant preacher in the state because of the offerings she collected. After that first explosive year of success, though, her ministry fizzled. She tried for decades to build a reputation as a religious leader, but everyone sort of lost interest. Universalism wasn't ready to receive wisdom from a woman yet. The second woman, the second mother of our faith that I want to talk about today, is Olympia Brown. She was born in 1835, the same year that her only predecessor, Maria Cook, died. Olympia Brown was fully ordained as a Universalist minister. She was the first woman to achieve full ministerial standing by any American denomination. Among only a handful of other women to graduate from college, she received a bachelor's degree from Antioch in 1860, and 3 years later became the first woman to graduate from a theological school, St. Lawrence University. As a young minister, she took an active role in women's suffrage movement and was one of the few original suffragettes to live long enough to vote in the 1920 presidential election. Even with a successful ministry career, she's definitely better known for her work in women's rights. As pioneers, they both struggled to find their way in ministry. They both had profoundly strong faith, and they came to that faith from very different directions. For Olympia Brown, it was an intellectual exercise. From her childhood, she was raised with the support of a Universalist family, and her call to Universalist ministry came in large part to her academic pursuits. Before college, Olympia Brown was at Mount Holyoke School for Young Women. Upon enrolling there, they had every young woman identify herself in 3 categories: either a professing Christian, hopefully pious, or hopeless. The school had a very clear mission to make God-fearing Christians out of all of their students. So they regularly invited evangelists to preach there. And as was the custom in the day, those preachers spoke almost exclusively about hell, eternal punishment, and salvation through Jesus. Olympia Brown had grown up in a Universalist household, as I said. After hearing sermon after sermon about hell and punishment, she began to wonder, is this even in the Bible? What was the truth? And most importantly, how could she find that truth for herself? So this curious young woman wrote to the Universalist headquarters for book recommendations for how she could study the Bible on her own. Remember, this was before she even went to college. What she learned from her studies set her mind ablaze. There were different interpretations of this book, and there were good reasons why she shouldn't believe the hellfire and brimstone message of the preachers on campus. And that moment guided her study. She began to ask, why don't preachers dwell on God's love when that is such a motivating force between Jesus' message? Now, Maria Cook's journey into ministry couldn't have been more different. She wasn't a close student of the Bible, and she wasn't introduced to Universalist theology by other people, not even her family. She felt herself called by God to go out from her family to preach the radical message of universal love. She knew it in her heart that the important message was one of love for all, not hell and punishment. Her family was kind, but they really didn't approve of her ideas or her attempts to preach. In fact, they were a little afraid that she might be dealing with mental health issues. Sadly, we don't have a whole lot of information about Maria Cook because her ministry was so difficult. But hers is a very, very important story to tell. It speaks of the heartfelt, personal conversion experience that is part of our Universalist heritage. We Unitarian Universalists often think of ourselves as a religion of reason and science, and we are that. We're also a religion of knowing truths deep in our heart, without books or instruction or anyone else. We know that love is more powerful than hate, not through reason, but through our experience and our faith. People come into our congregations for a lot of different reasons. Some come for community, some for social justice, some for our particular beliefs. These people typically aren't biblical scholars or church historians. They haven't read contemporary Christian theology or Unitarian history. No one persuaded them through a reasoned argument that Unitarian Universalism was the logical way. People who land here for theological reasons have made a choice to follow the beliefs in their heart for the most part, through their own experience of the holy and through their own human intuition about the power of love. The faith of our predecessors was forged through critical thought and through personal experience. Now, there's one more source that leads us to our religious understandings, and that's life experience. Throughout our lives, we learn more than facts and figures. We learn about forgiveness and responsibility, courage and love and interdependence. Life experiences, one after another, build up a way of seeing and understanding our world. And there are a couple of examples of Olympia Brown's life that built up a framework for her beliefs. We know a lot about her because she left an unpublished autobiography for us to learn from years later. One of the lessons that she learned firsthand was from a former slave named Morgan Elam, who came to live on her family farm. He had escaped from the South and was employed by her father for 7 years. One day, as a child, Olympia asked Elam Morgan why he had fled and come to their town. And he explained that his previous master had died, and he feared that he would be sold into even worse conditions. So early one morning, he found a gray horse in the barn and just rode away. He didn't know where he was going, he just knew he was going north. She was amazed by this journey story, but a new thought stuck in her head. "Was the horse yours?" she asked. Morgan answered, "I suppose it must have been. I raised it." When she wrote about this as an adult, Olympia saw this childhood conversation with an escaped slave as her first lesson in philosophy. That day she learned that laborers are entitled to the fruit of their work. "Was the horse yours?" she asked. "I suppose it must have been. I raised it." It's a lesson that she thought about for the rest of her life. One more example of experience that informs faith is about Olympia Brown's family. I mentioned earlier in school she had some confusion at Mount Holyoke, and in those years she exchanged letters with her mother. She had a very close relationship with her, and one of these letters is a window into that relationship. This is perhaps the best Mother's Day quote I have ever found. In this letter, her mom writes, "It would cause me the most poignant sorrow were you to become the dupe of superstitious bigotry. Dismiss the subject of creeds for the present, and be content with a pure heart, a conscious discharge of duty, and resignation and trust in God. I have great confidence in your excellent, plain common sense. Use it. Don't regard the notion sometimes advanced that it is wrong to use reason in religious opinions." And then, along the margins of that same letter, Olympia's mother writes these touching words: "Do not throw my letter aside carelessly, but remember, it's from the heart of your mother, and its opinions, if not learned or well defended, are the result of years of reflection." Her parents' unwavering support shaped this young mind. They planted the seeds for her commitment to the abolition of slavery and women's rights to vote. Olympia Brown had the benefit of unending support. Some of us have enjoyed similar relationships, others have not. Whatever relationships we have had with mothers, those relationships, those experiences are the raw material of faith. It's our task to embrace those lessons or maybe refashion them into something more useful. It's our task as Unitarian Universalists to gather up those varied experiences of our life and to construct a faith for ourselves that sustains us. You see, thinking through what you believe and building our personal theology isn't just an intellectual exercise. It's a process of connecting with those things that are most precious so that when life gets tough, we know we have something to hold on to. The mothers of our faith were not only smart and charismatic, they were brave, and their fortitude was amazing. To give you a sense of Olympia Brown's fortitude, her biography opens with the story of a cold, rainy day in 1917, when at the age of 82 years old, she picketed the White House along with her sisters. They marched hour after hour in their Victorian-era dresses. Occasionally, one of the marchers fainted or dropped from exhaustion. Olympia marched until the end of the day. She was a tireless activist, an insightful woman, and a minister of deep faith in the inherent worth and dignity of every person. So this Mother's Day, let us remember the women who have gone before us, wise, courageous, and kind. These mothers of Unitarian Universalism built a personal faith that sustained their work. So let us follow suit and construct for ourselves a faith that sustains the work of our lives. Amen.